Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dirt Nap City, the show about interesting people who happen to be dead. And today, Kelly, I'm breaking that rule.
What?
I'm talking about somebody who might not be very interesting, but the story of this person is very interesting, and I think you're going to enjoy it.
Okay.
But overall, I think this person might have been a dud.
Really?
Yeah. So let me tell you this.
Well, hold on. Let's just confirm. This person is a resident of Dirt Nap City.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Has been for some time. Oh,
Okay.
Don't worry. You're in good hands here. You're in good hands.
I'm looking forward to it.
There are many American history professors that start their semesters off by asking the following questions of their students. They say, write down the first 10 names that come to mind when I say American history from the beginning to the Civil War. And then people write down names.
Okay. George Washington and such.
Sure. And then they say, all right, do the same thing, but you're not allowed to put any presidents, generals, or statesmen. And this person here usually comes out on top.
Alexander Hamilton.
No, but that's a really good guess. But I think he was a statesman. But hold on. I've made a riddle for you.
Okay.
All right. Now riddles don't have to rhyme, right?
I was just about to ask if it rhymed, but it doesn't. It doesn't have to.
I was thinking maybe I should try to make it rhyme, but all right, here we go.
In the style of Dr. Seuss.
No, this is not that. This is the riddle, and I think you'll get it. So, I don't want to raise any red flags, but if she were around today, she might have hooked up with Lee Greenwood.
Betsy Ross.
Yeah.
That's good.
Little body.
So I don't want to raise any red flags.
So you missed the so part.
That's good. That's good. No, it was a great clue. Betsy Ross.
Yeah. Now, what do you know about Betsy Ross? You probably know exactly one thing about Betsy Ross.
Right. She sewed the American flag, and I think that's all I know.
So it's crazy. We all know this person, right? And I think we've established before, maybe in the Pilgrims episode, that very much of a lot of our American history knowledge comes from Schoolhouse Rock, right?
Yeah, very true.
More so than probably any class that we took in high school or college. We always remember Schoolhouse Rock, and we can talk today about whether that's been good or bad for our generation, because they've basically simplified American history down to its lowest common denominator and often get it pretty wrong, as we figured out with the Pilgrims episode, right?
I think it was good for our generation because I feel like there are historical figures that, we as Gen Xers, 50-something-year-olds, know the names of and know a little bit about that younger people have never even heard of. I feel like we at least know, I know who that is,
Sure, but American history shouldn't be about Q ratings, right? And that's basically what it's come to.
But isn't that better than who the hell is that?
I don't know. In the case of Betsy Ross, maybe not. Because Betsy Ross didn't really sew the first American flag.
What?
She was a pretty unnotable, unremarkable person who lived and died, and then 100 years later, everybody started talking about Betsy Ross.
Wow.
So let me tell you about her.
Please.
Born in 1752 in British America, right? So what would now be New Jersey, maybe, and died in 1836 in Philadelphia. So part of that whole Revolutionary War crew. And she died in, like I said, in 1836. But it turns out Betsy Ross is really just a story, just like the Pilgrim story, where a lot of it is kind of told from the perspective of, in that case, 20th century America. In this case, 19th century America.
Right.
Nobody really knew who Betsy Ross was, or never really heard of Betsy Ross until the centennial, or around 1870, leading up to the centennial of this country in 1876. Wow. So what happened was her grandson presented a paper to a historical society and claimed that in 1776, George Washington visited her. She was a seamstress, right? She made flags and such. That George Washington visited her shop and gave her a rough sketch of a striped flag with 13 stars and a blue background.
Okay.
Those stars had 6 points. And that Betsy Ross took out a piece of paper, did some folding, and folded this thing into like triangles and squares, and did some
Origami.
origami.
A little crane.
With a single clip, she made a 5-pointed star. And she basically told George Washington, look how easy it is to make a 5-point star. I could do these all day long. Let me take this from here. I've got your flag. Let me redesign this thing. Within days, she made the first American flag. This
Wow.
is the legend. He had no documentation to support any of this, but he got signed affidavits from a bunch of his family members who had said that when they were younger, they had heard Betsy Ross tell this story. And that's all we're living on here is a bunch of family members saying this.
Wow. So she would have a few martinis at the Christmas party, and I tell you what, I knew George Washington.
None of this added up to actual historians who were saying, okay, well, why would George Washington walk into this random? First of all, I think he had said there was like a flag committee or something, and this didn't happen. There was no kind of flag. There was a lot of shady
The great
stuff.
grandson had said there was a flag committee.
It was just her grandson, right?
Her
But
grandson. Okay.
he had made all these assertions about the way it happened. And of course, he was hearing all this second and third hand anyways. And I'm not saying he was trying to pull a hoax off on the nation.
Hoodwink, as it was.
I don't know if I'm not claiming he did that, but historians who were fact checking this stuff, and even historians today, just find no evidence that this was or could have even been the case. There were other people that probably did make the flag, but it's interesting to me. The interesting part is, why is that important? What I'm sure in other countries they don't argue about who made the first flag.
That's
But
an interesting point.
this was a really important part of American history. And as we'll talk about, I think it was important to have a common person as a face of the revolution. I think it was important to have a woman as the face of this, and reflecting 19th century, not 18th century, but 19th century values about women. The idea, the story of her kind of standing up to George Washington, but not 20th century or 21st century woman, basically just making a suggestion to him,
Yeah.
But it was like it reflected the changing role of women.
Adding value to the process.
Absolutely. And we're talking about this is a 19th century story, not an 18th century story. This is the story about the 1870s, not the 1770s.
Yeah.
And how it kind of became part of our world.
And that's when her grandson was alive and said all this.
Exactly. So it was one of these kind of revisionist history things that make sense of that time, but wouldn't have made sense of the time earlier. She wasn't even really known as Betsy Ross, to tell you the truth. She was born Elizabeth Griscom, and in 1773, she married a guy named John Ross. And then he was killed in the Revolutionary War just 2 years later, in 1775. And by 1777, she had married again to this guy, Joseph Ashburn. So she was only a Ross for like 2 years.
Huh.
And I don't know if she went by Betsy. She might have been by Elizabeth Griscom, and then Elizabeth Ashburn and Elizabeth Claypool. I don't know if she was known as Betsy Ross.
But it's the same person. Yeah, it's interesting. She had these aliases or these different possible names.
Well, I mean, she kept getting married. She married Joseph Ashburn in 1777. He was actually charged with treason. He tried to go back to Britain, and because he was fighting for the war, he was charged with treason, prisoned in 1780, and died in jail. Then the guy who came back and told Betsy that he died, she ended up marrying that guy, John Claypool, in 1783. So this is the guy that told her that her husband had just been killed. That's a little shady to me too.
You mean from he was in the war with her husband with Ross? He
Yeah, he
Claypool
no
was
with
in the war with Ross and came back to tell her.
well, Ashburn was the one that died in jail, like as a
Yeah.
prisoner of war. So I don't know about Ross. He was just killed in the war. She remarried Ashburn, and Claypool was the third husband that she had.
Wow.
Her house. If you've ever been to the historical sites of Philadelphia, the Betsy Ross house is one of the most popular tourist sites in Philadelphia.
Actually, I had been there.
Have
It's like
you?
a very narrow, small houses, kind of narrow pedestrian street.
Well, here's the bad news. We don't even think that she actually lived there. Um, this whole thing is falling apart, isn't it?
It is.
She might have actually lived in a house next door, but that house got torn down before the other one had been declared a historical landmark. So they kind of said, well, she lived here.
Yeah, she was
Um,
close.
in 1975, in preparation for the bicentennial, they were going to reinter her. They were going to dig up her bones where she was buried and then put her by the Betsy Ross house.
Oh,
So
and let me guess, that Yale group took her. They had stolen her bones. The
the Skull and Bones.
Skull and Bones Society of Yale.
Close. They went. The construction workers went. They dug her up, and there was no remains.
So someone had stolen her,
I don't
or she had
know.
never been buried there in the first place.
They did have a family plot, and then they found through some scientific testing that there were some bones there that were hers. So they just threw those in by the Betsy Ross house, and basically wherever. But the whole thing is a lie, Kelly. Is what I'm trying to say.
Wow.
She wasn't really known as Betsy Ross. She didn't live in the Betsy Ross house. She's not really buried in the
And she
where
might
you
not
think
have
she is.
sewn the flag.
And she probably didn't sew the flag. So when we say interesting people who happen to be dead, she wasn't interesting for like 100 years after she died.
Right.
Or maybe
From
60 years.
1776 to 1875, nobody
I
had heard of
guess
her.
I guess she died in what 1836, and then people started talking about her maybe 35, 40 years later.
Right.
So maybe not 100 years later, but definitely a different time.
So really her grandson was the interesting person here. The one that
Yeah.
the one that brought all this, to the forefront. I mean, if you could make a claim about your grandmother and nobody could disprove it and it fit the American narrative, you would do it, right? I would do it.
It was the perfect story at the perfect time. When you think about it, she's really the only famous woman from the Revolutionary War. And that story is kind of a story of entrepreneurship. She had her own flag or
Shop.
sewing, seamstress shop. And the idea of standing up to George Washington is kind of a modern tale. But just like George Washington chopping down the cherry tree, American history is filled with kind of lies and half truths and embellishments, and like I
Wow.
said, kind of the schoolhouse rockification of American history. It's an easy kind of simplistic story to say, yeah, and then there was Betsy Ross as part of the crew too. What she did totally fit with 19th century's changing ideas about women. Women were the suffragette movement was starting about getting women the right to vote, and this kind of fit right in with kind of a American woman hero in 19 and it didn't start getting debunked actually until the 20th century when historians were starting to not figure it out. In fact, in 1952 they came out with a postage stamp for Betsy Ross's 200th birthday, and it shows her presenting the flag to George Washington, and that was a big, that was
Wow.
a big deal. And I think in the in the 20th century, just like in the 19th century, we're all pretty on board with the Betsy Ross story. And historians often get a bad rap for trying to rain on people's parade, but they're just trying to get it accurate. They're just trying to figure it
I was
out.
just about to say that actually is like, at what point, what good does it do to change that? Why rain on the parade? You literally just said it. So it's one of those things where, okay, it is a great story. It does kind of fit. It does work in favor of women's movements and the evolution of their role in society. Why change it? Are you going to tell me it was a white man that sewed the flag?
When I told my son this, that's what he said. He said, "He says, what are you going to tell me? It was a white man that
Oh, he said the same
made the
thing.
flag." Yeah, he did. I know. Actually, I think that's right. I think there's a person named Francis, not Scott Key. I can't remember his name. Francis. I had it here, but there was a guy that they think may have designed it. Now, designing it versus sewing it, there was no one flag. Obviously, there was lots of flags,
Yeah.
and depending during the war, depending on the regiment, they all had their own flags, and they all looked a little bit different. Uh, some of them, most of them had stars, and most of them had stripes. Most of them were red, white, and blue, but there was no kind of uniform flag.
There was no mass production. There was no Pantone colors or RGB
Right.
values or any way to tell if that was exactly the right blue. What
Exactly.
is the RGB value or the CMYK value of the
Right.
blue on the flag? At that time nobody knew. It was just whatever blue dye you had that was close. So there probably were a lot of iterations, not just of the layout of it, but also of the colors, of the distance between the stars. I mean, you can imagine, back then that you couldn't make it exactly the same every single time.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now there is an interesting story that historians are more ready to accept that has nothing to do with the flag. And that's the story right after the Battle of Trenton. Do you know who the Hessians were? Do you know anything
No,
about Hessians?
no.
Hessians were the German soldiers that were fighting with the British
Okay.
against the Americans in
Okay.
the Revolutionary War. And there was in December of 1776, there was the Battle of Trenton, and in New Jersey, and there was a Hessian general that was moving his troops south to the Battle of Ironworks Hill. And I'm not a big Revolutionary War scholar, but just bear with me here. And he was moving his troops, and there was another Hessian group that wanted to um, to support them, but Count Karl Emil Ulrich von Donop, he was
Wow.
very German, right? Very Hessian. He had a regiment of 2,000 troops, or maybe 1,000 troops, and it was moving them southern. And there was another group that wanted to support him, but he had like personality conflicts with that general. So he was like, I'm not going to do that. And instead, he decided to spend Christmas in the company of a beautiful young widow. And because of this, because he spent the night with this beautiful young widow, they got there late and got defeated, and it was a very significant battle in the
Wow.
war
A
that led
loss.
to
The Battle of Trenton.
and that beautiful young widow was said to be Betsy Ross.
Ah,
So maybe
okay.
didn't have anything to do with the flag, but maybe was a hero to her nation in other ways.
So she
But
she distracted this Hessian general while our troops moved into position, and then by the time he got there and got his belt buckled up, they were done for.
now let's face it. If we were to make a movie about Betsy Ross, would you have 90 minutes of somebody sewing a flag, or would you focus on that part?
Yeah. I think you could probably get the NC-17 rating too. If you really wanted to go controversial.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's an interesting part, but they said we'll never really know about that because it's just written that it was a beautiful young widow that distracted him. And there's some evidence, but historians disagree on that. And that's probably something like that you're never going to get new information about.
Yeah,
And I don't know what her grandson had to say about that. That's
or
something
if
that
it
you
was
might
even
know. I
brought
don't know.
up. I mean, at the time,
I'm sure they had heard rumors.
like you said, it fit the narrative so well that I imagine he was they probably put on a front that they were fact checking him, but in reality, they were like, yes, this works so great for the 1876 celebration. Let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, do you know what the Betsy Ross flag looks like? Can you picture that in your mind's eye?
Yeah, wasn't it round like the star? I'm sorry, the star pattern was round, and and uh and then otherwise it was the same,
How many
but
stars?
13 stars,
13 stars in a circle, right?
13 original
And
colonies
hmm and then alternating on a blue background, 13 white stars on a
on a
blue
blue
background
background,
with
alternating
5 points.
red and white stripes.
Right, and you know what the top stripe is?
The top is red.
Red. It alternates, right?
Yep,
It alternates red and white all the way down.
that
Um,
hasn't changed, right? It's still red on the top and same number of stripes and all that.
that's right. That's right. That part hasn't changed. Now we have, of course, we have 50 stars. Um, Believe it or not, a lot of people think that there's 52 stars. Some people think there's 52 states.
Because of Puerto
Um,
Rico?
I don't know, man, but a lot of people think there's 52 states in the United States.
Well, there were 48 stars for a long time, right?
Yeah,
Until
so
Alaska and Hawaii
yeah, so
became.
this is pretty interesting. So there were 13 stars until 1795, and then there were 15 stars until 1818. And then every time a new state was added, they added a new star to the flag. And it was always on July 4th when they changed the flag. So a flag would be from like, and sometimes only for a year. It'd be like from July 4th on this date until July 3rd on
So
this
if a
date
new state got accepted in January, they had to wait 7 months until the
to
new
put it on the flag.
flag.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So like in 1818, there was 20 stars. And then there was like one a year. And then we had 24 stars for about 14 years from 1822 to 1836. And then a 25th for a year, and then a 26 star from 1837 to 1845. And then the longest we had any one flag for a while was we had 48 stars from 1912 to 1959.
Wow.
Then 49 stars when Alaska got added in 1959. And then the next year, Hawaii got added. So in 1959, there was 49 stars. But from
I guess I
1912 to
didn't realize
1959, there were 48 stars. So there's like 1 year. And that'd probably be cool to get a hold of the 49. If you saw a flag with 49
there wouldn't
stars, you
be
know it
very
came from
many of them.
1959.
There
Well,
wouldn't be
probably
very
not.
many of them. And I didn't realize. I mean, I guess I knew this. I had heard this before, but I didn't realize Alaska and Hawaii were that recent. I mean, not that that's that. It is quite a while ago, but
Yeah, it's like 10 years
1960,
before we were born. Yeah.
1960. If we had been born 10, 15 years earlier in Hawaii, we might not even be U.S. citizens.
Right. Yeah. There's been 50 stars since 1960.
Okay.
And,
Wow.
and that's do you know kind of how those stars are arranged? How do you arrange? Do you think it's 10 rows of 5?
That's a great question. I'm looking around for a flag. I don't know. How is it? Because
It's
they kind of
9.
alternate, right? They kind of alternate.
Yep.
There's like 4 and then 5 and 4 and 5.
6 and 5.
6 and 5. Okay.
So it's 9 rows of alternating. The first row has 6 stars, and then alternating where it makes like a diagonal,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then 5 stars, and then 6
Like the
and
angle
5.
of the star,
Yep.
it's like a straight line between all the angles of the stars.
I don't know what the 49s. I don't know if they completely. I guess I should have.
Well, that could have been 7 by 7.
Yeah, I wonder if they did
Isn't
that.
7 times 7 49?
Yes. You think it was as?
That's how I would have done it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I wonder. Yeah, I think the 13 was the only one that was in a circle though, and then they had to start putting them in lines though.
Right. Right.
And I don't know if other countries are this kind of preoccupied with their flag, or if their flag undergoes such big overhauls as ours does. Ours has really have been a kind of a working document.
But we're one of the youngest countries in the world still, right? I mean, a lot, if you think about European countries, and I guess African countries are probably kind of younger because, or, they weren't officially countries until more recently. But if you think about all of Europe and, well, no, I guess that's not true. There's a lot of, newer countries. Istanbul is Constantinople, although I guess that's a city, not a country. So
It's a song, actually.
it's a song. Yes. Uh, yeah, it is interesting that we ended up right at 50 as well. Although, I have heard a lot of people saying that Puerto Rico kind of gets a raw deal because they don't have all the benefits of being a state.
Right. And DC statehood is always coming
Is
up.
that a
So
thing?
yeah, there's a lot of people that are trying to get DC statehood. So we probably wouldn't go to 51. We'd probably go to 52. If we'd probably add those two in at the same time. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. Those are notoriously Democratic areas of the country. It would be adding two primarily Democrat um, influenced states. So I think it'd be hard for Republicans to get on board with that, and that's probably the issue right now.
I've even heard people. I know someone who's from Portland, Oregon, and he said that there's a big group in there that of more conservative leaning people that want to split Oregon in half because they feel like Portland is very, very liberal, but 2/3 of Oregon is very, very, or some percentage is very, very conservative, and so
Yeah.
they don't. I guess, but that's also a kind of interesting thing. Is it better for a state to be completely red or completely blue, or is it better if there's a mix?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Do we need to gerrymander states
Yeah,
and call them new states? Of course, that's what happened with the Dakotas
yeah.
that they split into two
But that
because
was that was such a big area of land, that probably splitting into two made sense. But like Virginia and West Virginia, that was probably more of a Civil War thing, right?
I don't know. In a lot of those cases, I think they think that they're better than one half of the state thinks they're better than the other.
Yeah.
I've heard people in California talk about how not north and south, but east and west, even though it's such a small strip of land that um, west part of California is a lot more liberal than the east part of California. But
Hmm.
I agree with you. Is that what you're trying to do? Is that what you're trying to do? Is just create a state of like-minded people? I don't.
Yeah, yeah. Why is that better? Why is that necessarily? I mean, I guess on the surface it might seem better, but I think ultimately having diverse thoughts within a same state might give the state some strength that it wouldn't have if it didn't have, it was all homogenous. But well, I am very surprised, shocked, and chagrined about Betsy Ross, or whatever her name was, Elizabeth
Claypool.
Claypool. And I wonder if she's related to Les Claypool.
Wouldn't that be something? Don't think they spell it the same way, but you never know.
Yeah,
Wouldn't that
yeah,
be
you never
something?
know. I mean, we know about your heritage, and there's lots going on there. Well, I also would be interested to know what inspired her grandson to do that. Why did he take it upon himself to fight that battle and go to the powers that be? And is that even a possible thing today? Right? Could you go to the government and say, "I heard this story," and would it pass?
Well, he didn't go to the government. He went to he spoke at like a conference of historians, and
Oh,
he
like a
said,
TED Talk kind of thing.
I've got a I've got a story for you." And he knew that it was that remember when we were kids in the bicentennial,
Yeah, I remember
uh,
the bicentennial. I remember
kind
the
of
bicentennial quarter.
the bicentennial was, for those of you who weren't alive in 1976, the bicentennial just kind of took over everything.
It was a big
Everything
deal.
in 1976 was red, white, and blue. It was a big deal.
Drums and fife.
Yeah, I'm guessing that in 2026, when we're going to have our bisesquicentennial, we'll have something similar. That it'll be the 250th anniversary
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the country,
Wow,
and
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
I'm sure they're doing things right now to make that a big celebration, but it was a really big deal, and I'm sure that the centennial might have even bigger deal. But yeah, so he reported to this historical society, and then there's I think there were probably reporters there, and then it just kind of took over. And like I
Wow.
said, it was the right story for the right time. There wasn't a lot of American women that were considered heroic
Yeah.
at the time. So it was just kind of like the first woman American hero. So, like you say, it was kind of the probably a story that people needed to hear. It's when you really think about it, it's kind of silly, anyways. That's like it's all about a flag. It's all about making a flag or designing a flag. Um, it's just this seamstress. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's
Seamstress
it's
for the
one of those
band.
names. It's one of those names that's just everybody knows who Betsy Ross
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
but nobody knows any deeper than that. And then when you start scratching deeper than that, there's not a lot there. So you would say you would rather not have anybody look into this and just say, let's just call this the truth.
I'm kind of like that in a lot of areas, meaning that I yeah, I feel like there are a lot of things. There's a lot better things we could be doing with our time. Right. Right. I mean, I just feel like
Unless you're a historian and that's your job.
yeah, but even historians, I don't feel like Betsy Ross is usurping anybody, or I don't know. It just feels like one of those things where why are we wasting our time on this? Why are we? Yeah, I would let it lie.
This is interesting. This historian, one of the ones that started that experiment that I told you, where he asked people to name his students to name the American heroes. He says that this story endures because it's the most inclusive symbol of national identity. That if George Washington is the father of our country, then Betsy Ross exists symbolically as the mother of the country who gives birth to our collective symbol, the American flag. In America's civil religion, she occupies the position of the Virgin Mary.
Wow.
And that just like in the biblical story, uh, of Mary in the Betsy Ross legend, an ordinary woman is visited by a distant god and commanded uh, to make this flag, and that whenever you have a little kids doing the pageants of American history, you always have George Washington visiting a humble seamstress in their
Right.
tiny home and asking if she will make the nation's flag, and then she brings forth from her lap the flag and the promise of freedom, and that it's a legend that just keeps building and building. Um, so from your perspective, ignorance is bliss, and we don't really need to know the truth.
Yes. Plus, like I said, maybe we could focus on things that are more important. But that's a very subjective thing, right? I'm actually sitting here. I seem to recall that there was a Beastie Boys lyric about Betsy Ross somewhere. And I can't. I'm looking for I'm looking for it. If anybody knows it, send it to not@dirtnapcity.com, please, because um, I know Paul Revere, of course, they talk about him.
Right.
They talk about Colonel Sanders. I just know there's a Betsy Ross reference in a Beastie Boys song. And that's kind of when I feel like you've really made it, is when you are included in a famous rap song.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Sadahara O.
Yeah, Sadahar, baseball player, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Got more hits than Sadahar O.
That's
Well,
exactly.
Alex, this was great. This was quite unexpected. As you said, it broke a little bit of a rule, but I think what's interesting is the interesting person is not the person herself. It's the story that was
The
told about this
legend,
person.
yeah,
The
the
legend.
legend about the story.
Yeah.
And she was very much a real person, but I would think that in her own time, she wasn't, not that we had people called celebrities too much back then, but I would say she was not a household name that anybody knew. I would guess that if you talk to people that were contemporaries of hers, nobody had ever heard of Betsy Ross. And it wasn't until, school children in the centennial and the bicentennial. But now everybody knows who Betsy Ross is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well done. Well done. Thank you.
Do you know the only flag in the world that doesn't have four sides?
The only like it's a different shape.
It's like
Um,
two triangles on top of each other.
no, is it
Yeah,
is it like a semaphore flag?
Nepal. Yeah, it kind of looks like a
Nepal.
semaphore flag. Yeah. And then there's two flags in the world that are actually square. There aren't rectangles.
Okay. Hold on, hold on. I was going to say Switzerland, but that's not right.
Yes. Yes, that is right.
Switzerland? Oh, okay.
Switzerland.
All right.
Switzerland and the Vatican,
And the Vatican.
um, which is
Wow.
the smallest country in the world.
Wasn't that an 80s sitcom, Square Flags? Oh no, Square
Square
Pegs.
pegs. Yeah. Yeah. uh, the rarest country on a flag is purple. There's only two flags in the world that have purple in them because that's usually a color of royalty.
Okay.
And it's
I'm going to say
because of that usually
Uruguay and Andorra.
Nicaragua and Dominica.
Oh, okay.
And then the oldest flag in the world is Denmark. That
Wow.
the Danish flag was first used in 1625, but they actually think the design was created in 1219.
Wow. That is
From yeah, so
that is a
I
grand old flag, as they say.
now this you know what we call our flag here,
Old Glory.
or
Stars and Stripes.
or
Uh,
it's the same name as our song.
Star Spangled Banner.
Right, the Star Spangled Banner. And actually, that was one of the giveaways that when the grandson was said, and my grandmother, she said I'd be honored to make the Star Spangled Banner.
Right.
And apparently
Because
they didn't start calling it that
wasn't
until
that
like
Francis Scott Key wrote that as part of the lyrics to the national anthem, right?
right,
But
right,
did
right,
everybody
right.
call it that, or was that something
No,
Francis Scott Key came
not
up with?
not until like way later, like 1812 or something, that people started calling it that. So that was like one of the giveaways that this guy
That was a
might know.
telltale sign that someone was
Yeah.
lying.
Now they have the Betsy Ross flag in on display at I believe in at Independence Hall. No, I think it's in the Smithsonian actually. The Betsy Ross flag, and I've
Okay.
I've visited that flag.
And
But
it's supposed
you
to
know,
have been sewn by Betsy Ross.
yeah, they call it the Betsy Ross flag. I don't. And interestingly enough, if you go to the U.S. Department of the Interior website, they still, yeah, it's the Betsy Ross story. That this
Yeah,
flag
yeah.
was created by Betsy. They tell that story still in the official U.S. government website about the American flag. So
Wait, the
the
government lied about
official
our history? What?
the official party line for the U.S. government is still that Betsy Ross made the flag, and they're probably not changing it anytime soon.
Yeah.
But now you seem to be calling that a lie and saying that our government's lie. But you just advocated for that not 10 minutes ago.
No. I think there's a time and a place where just sticking with the status quo is the right thing to do. But I know that's probably a very controversial statement. But I don't know. Again, it just feels like something that has such little real significance to the world today that why mess with it? Why not focus on other things? I would not want to lie about the way we treated certain people in the past, the way the government treated certain people, or institutional racism, or war crimes, or anything like that. That feels more important to me. But who sewed the first flag? You know.
You heard it. You heard it, folks. Kelly's into lying to the
That's right.
endorses people lying to
The
government lying to people.
the lion does not concern itself with the opinions of the sheep.
There you go. All right, Kelly. Well, that was the Betsy Ross episode. R.I.P. Betsy. Whatever your name is.
R.I.P. Betsy Elizabeth Claypool Ross, whatever your name was,
And wherever you rest.
wherever your bones are.
And
Yeah, I
whatever
wonder
you
if you
did,
can. I wonder if you can move to Dirt Nap City if your bones are spread all over. I think you can.
I think you can.
Just get a wheelchair or something.
Sure. But if there's a flag for Dirt Nap City, chances are her grandson is claiming that she made it.
That's right. And he probably lives in Dirt Nap City as well.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, thank you. That was awesome.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and tune in for next time for an exciting episode of somebody who may or may not be interesting that happens to be dead. Bye.
Bye-bye.